Hi, thank you and welcome to our podcast, Beyond the Pages of Care. My name is Angela, and I'm joined here with my fellow podcast mates, Joanna, Emily, Ashanti, and Jenilyn. I just want to forewarn anyone that's listening that this may be traumatizing and to listen at your own discretion. This topic is about trauma and I will be discussing the prologue of the book by Bessel van der Kolk, which is called The Body Keeps Score. Um, yeah, so Bessel van der Kolk wrote this book, and it's a very thorough kind of look into what can be daunting and sometimes heartbreaking sight into trauma and the effects that it has on the brain and development of young minds and even adults. So just to read, this are just some things that I took from the prologue. So okay. One does not have to be a combat soldier or visit a refugee camp in Syria or the Congo to encounter trauma. Trauma happens to us, our friends, our families, and our neighbors. Research by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has shown that 1 in 5 Americans were sexually molested as a child, 1 in 4 were beaten by a parent to the point of a mark being left on their body, and 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence. A quarter of Americans grew up with alcoholic relatives, and 1 out of 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit. As human beings, we belong to an extremely resilient species. Traumatic experiences do leave traces, whether on a large scale, on our histories and cultures, or close to home, on our families. They also leave traces on our minds and emotions, on our capacity for joy and intimacy, and even on our biology and immune systems. The wives of men who suffer from PTSD tend to become depressed, and the children of depressed mothers are at risk of growing up insecure and anxious. Having been exposed to family violence as a child often makes it difficult to establish stable, trusting relationships as an adult. Trauma, by definition, is unbearable and intolerable. Research from new disciplines reveals to us that trauma produces an actual physiological change. This includes a recalibration of the brain's alarm system and an increase of stress hormone activity. We now know that trauma compromises the brain area that communicates the physical, embodied feeling of being alive. These changes explain why traumatized individuals become hypervigilant to threat. They also help us understand why traumatized people keep repeating the same problems and have trouble learning from experience. We now know that their behaviors are not just the result of moral failings, lack of willpower, or bad character. They're caused by actual changes in the brain. Victims of child abuse, natural disasters, wars, accidents, and human trafficking. People who have suffered assaults by intimates and strangers. We have a long tradition of discussing all our patients in great depth at weekly treatment team meetings and carefully tracking how well different forms of treatment work for particular individuals. How can people gain control over these residues of past trauma and return to being masters of their own ship? Talking, understanding, and human connections help, and drugs can dampen hyperactive alarm systems. The imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of trauma, thereby regaining self-mastery. So behaviors like yelling, throwing tantrums, showing rage, and engaging in drug and alcohol use are signs and symptoms of trauma. So my question to you guys, after all of that was a lot, Have you witnessed anything like this ever? And it doesn't matter if you have a background as a CYC or not. Have you ever witnessed, like, a tantrum or a kid just like losing it? What were your thoughts at that time? And how does that change now in light of what you've just heard? The floor is open.
Um, I think like I've definitely seen like whether it's like out in public or even family members of like my family, whether they're nieces, nephews, or cousins. Um, I feel like when I first see it, like my initial thought is like I view it as like anger or like recklessness.
Mm,
But after just hearing and like also after like reflection, like in those type of situations, I think understanding them as trauma responses definitely shift my perspective.
mm,
Because these actions stem from a deep pain and it's not necessarily like a choice that they're acting out this way. And I
yeah,
think it reinforces the need for compassion and support rather than judgment when encountering these behaviors, which I'm definitely guilty of. When I'm in the moment, that's kind of like where my mind goes.
yeah, for sure.
So it's important to understand that they're not just choosing to act out. It's happening for like a reason.
Yeah. And like there's been many times like I've even seen, like if you're ever at the grocery store or you're like coming home, like I'm guilty of it too, where I hear a kid and I'm just like, "Oh my God, be quiet," or "Shut your kid up." Like I have those negative thoughts. I'm guilty, you know? Um, but yeah, they can all have those impacts on them, right? I didn't mean to cut you off. You can carry
No,
on.
no, no. That's kind of where I ended up.
Yeah. Anybody else kind of witness those things and think to yourself, like, oh my God, what's wrong with that kid? And, have you ever thought, you know, did you ever think that, oh, there's something wrong with them? Or did you think, like, maybe that kid has problems, like Shanti?
When I first started at my internship, it was a quiet few weeks, and then the first meltdown happened. And I think ever since that first meltdown, every time I've gone to internship since, this
Mm,
same child would have a meltdown.
mm,
And at first, I didn't know what to do, so I would watch my supervisor, and I saw the way that she would de escalate the situation.
mhm.
And after a while, I would be sent up to help de escalate without my supervisor. And after a while, it did get a little easier. I found out that when this child's in full meltdown mood, she will not speak until she has calmed down. So
Mm,
there was this one time she was in her classroom, she was screaming, she was throwing things around, and I started asking her random questions just to confuse her. Because I
yeah.
thought if I asked her questions that she knew of, she would probably get even more upset. So I
Hmm.
thought if I asked her, "What color is the sky?" and I answered green instead, I was thinking that it would distract her enough for her to listen to me try to get through to her. And
Yeah.
after a while, she did calm down. She did end up telling me why she was upset. But I feel like when young people have meltdowns, they're not listening.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're choosing not to listen, it's because right now they're more focused on what they're feeling, but they're
Yeah.
not really thinking about how they could deal with it in a different way.
Yeah. And that's also part of trauma too, is that it shuts off certain parts of our brain so that we're literally not operating in the same realm of the living. But I also think it's not just trauma, it's like that emotional part. So like if any of us, like, if you ever got really angry about something, are you thinking about you know, the time you went to the comedy club. You know what I mean? Like you're not thinking of those things, right? You're kind of like just whatchamacallit. Oh, help me out.
Are you meaning like in the moment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So my next question, um, Actually, I'm going to ask you, Ashanti, since you had that experience, do you know if that particular child suffers from trauma at all? Like, is this a trauma response? Do you know?
I don't believe it's a trauma response, but I have heard how the mother reacts to the way her child reacts when she's having her meltdowns. And
Okay.
so far, it's not really in the way that you would expect a parent to try and calm down their child. It's more isolating them to deal with it themselves.
How so? Like getting the child into a room on their own or
Yes, I heard once the child was locked inside their room and they screamed for hours until they calmed themselves down.
oh my. Well, that in itself can be traumatizing. So, I mean, that kid could very well now be operating from a trauma-based, because if they're, if you think of a child, the main thing that you want to do is have their needs met, right? And that safety and security. So, I mean, if I think to myself, like if I'm having like a full-blown meltdown and somebody locks me in my room and all I can do is scream, like essentially I'm screaming for help. I'm screaming for something, right? Makes sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah. Um, okay, so my next question is, so it says that trauma by definition is unbearable and intolerable. And as human beings, that we belong to an extremely resilient species. Traumatic experience leave traces. Leave traces on our minds. They um they have impacts on our capacity for joy and intimacy and even on our biology and immune systems. How does that speak to you? Just that in itself. Like, do you think this is helpful for the field or even just how it speaks to you in general?
I think like it kind of reinforces that trauma isn't just psychological, that it affects the whole person, including their emotions, their personal relationship, and even like their body, like physically. So I think it's kind of underscoring the importance of like a holistic approach to healing and like recognizing the resilience while also addressing the deep impact of trauma.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody want to add anything to that?
Uh,
Or what's their take on that? Joanna, yeah.
When like, hearing the definition of trauma and how it impacts the mind and the body and the emotions, like what I think from that is like how it's also expressed in different ways. Like Ashanti, like going on from your experience and like from what I've seen and experienced too, like for context, like I work in a retail store that sells children's clothes. So there's a lot of tantrums that I've seen. And it's like what we talked before, like the kids are just acting out like in the moment, like they're only focused on like getting that one thing that they want.
Hmm.
And like there's many times where like I've seen parents just be like, you need to start yelling at them. Like you need to stop, like you're acting bad, whatever. And sometimes parents will like, I'm leaving you here, and will literally walk out the store and the children is like the child is like following their parent, crying and like
Right.
screaming after them. And I'm just like, uh, I'm like, what? But I guess in a way, like not only the child, but the parents, like that's their own like trauma response. Like they're
Mm.
too overwhelmed that their only way of coping is to like leave the situation, like that flight response.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. In a way, it's like, and like that parent just might be going off of what they've learned in their own childhood, right? It's like, this is what
Exactly.
my parents did. Yeah. And
Hmm.
like, but like in itself, like if you think about that, like that kid is experiencing or could very well be experiencing a trauma from that moment, from the child
Exactly.
saying, yeah, like
Hmm.
that's pretty intense, right?
Yeah, it's just like it's like generational trauma in a way.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of has that a little bit, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Jenna Lynn, yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Like, I feel like, um, yeah, trauma is just it's just a lot to unpack. Like I feel like people just see it as like, oh, they're just traumatized, like they can't like I don't know, they're like a lot of people see trauma as being unfixable rather than resilient. And I feel like I don't know how to put this into words, but I feel like this definition or just having this understanding can help, practitioners, especially in the field, like just to recognize like, events of maybe re-traumatization and like, to prevent, young people from re-experiencing like these kinds of feelings, emotions and stuff like that. Like, and it's important to understand that like, yeah, it is very much a part of our biology and like sometimes it's beyond our control. Like at times I
Yeah.
feel like some youth, they may not like realize that they are, undergoing like re-traumatization and just like stuff
Hmm.
like that. Like they need to, just as practitioners, we need to just, be there, support them and um,
Yeah, like that
just,
preventative.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. That was great. That was really great. Does anybody want to add anything or going once, going twice, moving on? Um, dun, 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 dun. So Bessel says in the last part, imprints from the past can be transformed by having physical experiences that directly contradict the helplessness, rage, and collapse that are part of trauma, thereby regaining self-mastery. What are your thoughts on this? Or how does this translate to you?
Kind of like what I took from that is that he's like emphasizing that healing from trauma involves physical experience that counteract past helplessness and like suggests that like reclaiming that control, whether it's through movement or connection or action, can actually rewrite the brain's like chemistry or response to trauma. And I think it does a really good job at highlighting how essential and important the body's role is in actual healing. And it kind of reinforces the sense that like trauma isn't just mental, it's physical too. Like when you're experiencing it and also when you're trying to heal from it. I think a lot of the times it's very mentally focused when the body has such a large part in it that I think it is necessary to pay attention to that part of trauma as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I just also wanted to add, like, if there was anything from what I read, anything that jumped out to you as well is also welcome in this discussion because like we're saying, a lot of you have touched on a lot of things, like trauma is very a lot to unpack. Um, and my brain keeps going blank because I have trauma brain. So my brain is going blank a lot. So this has impacted my own um learning. But one of the things that I just want to say that I take from what I had said from what the last part is the part about regaining self-mastery. To me, it's just like it's a message of hope. It kind of says like this is this is really bad, for a lack of better words. You know, it's traumatic, right? And this is this big negative thing or this one negative thing or multiple negative things that have impacted or affected that person. But there is a possibility of regaining that self-mastery over yourself, over your body. And yeah, and Emily, you said you can do that through movement. You can do that through activities. One thing I'm learning is like it's replacing those negative experiences, very much like what Bessel says, if you're, he doesn't say that, but I'm saying it. You're
You think to
replacing
it.
the negative. Yeah, you're replacing the negative with the positive. So for just as a lack of like an example, somebody establishes a trauma reaction by going to eat at Red Lobster, and we figure out the trauma reaction is um there was a hurricane that hit right at the time that they were about to go into Red Lobster, and they tried to have their meal at that time. It hit, they had to hide in the Red Lobster. So they had a really negative experience, but that created trauma. And so every time they try to go to Red Lobster, they have some sort of experience where they have this trauma reaction. How do you replace that? How would you replace that? How do you think that you could make that a positive experience? Any thoughts on what you might do for that person who's suffered? Anyone?
I'm this is just like a quick thought from like hearing that example. Like
Yeah,
personally, like what I would do is obviously you can't just like dive right into Red Lobster, like bring them to Red Lobster. It's a lot of like what I feel like personally what I would do is like kind of start at the the not the finish line, the beginning line or whatever, and then like work our way up to that. Like maybe go to another restaurant or like talk about their experience and then maybe get takeout food from Red Lobster and eat it at a different location and like
yeah,
slowly like start building like a positive, like turning that negative narrative into a positive one
right.
by
And that's exactly,
slowly, yeah,
yes,
slowly
that's
including.
exactly it. Yeah. Did anybody want to add anything? Because this is all I've got in terms of what I had to ask you guys. Does anybody want to add anything that they know about trauma?
I think like just from not even just from personal experience, but also like things that I've noticed in schools is that I do think touching more on like the physical aspect of trauma and like recovering from it, I do think physical activity and exposing children to whether it's sports or yoga or dance is really important because your brain and body are so connected that I think if it's not already, I think should be made more available and should be taught more in schools.
I agree.
Like I find that with myself personally, like I definitely like to connect and work through my trauma through doing physical activities.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that body brain connection, right?
Hmm.
A lot of that, they call that somatic therapy. So that's just another something that um helps reach, it's another way of like kind of training the body to kind of like connect with your emotions and how you feel too. So yeah, like but yoga is fantastic for that.
Yeah, I've literally gotten like emotional during yoga at times. So like,
Yeah.
and the first time that's happened, it like freaked me out. I'm like, why am I like crying in the pigeon pose right now? Like
Aw.
it's true. Like it does connect to your brain and it in a way that I find isn't like talked about enough and like expressed enough. Like it's a different form of healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for being part of this. So to those that are listening, the book that I read from was The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that should be up in our information part of below. So, yeah, thank you all for listening.